Today's show is sponsored by Earth Friendly Products. For over 40 years, Earth Friendly Products brought you the greenest home products for all your family needs. Learn more at ecos.com. That's ecos.com. Now let's get to the show. Today's show is sponsored.
What's your thoughts on government cover-ups or covert societies attempting to control humanity? Do you believe in ancient astronauts, intergalactic communication, or extraterrestrial visitations? Ever had an experience with disembodied spirits or the paranormal universe? Are these subjects fact or fiction? Each week, Tony and Eddie explore these unbelievable realities and beyond. Exclusively on Truth Be Told.
Hello and welcome to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm your host, Tony Sweet.
And I'm Eddie Connor. Thanks for tuning in today, everybody. We want to introduce you to our psychic guest co-host, Jamie Gibson.
Hi, guys. Thanks for inviting me today.
And we're psyched to introduce you all to our paranormal investigator, Mark Nesbitt, right here on Truth Be Told.
Mark is the author of 15 books, and we're sure you've seen his stories on national television. He's been promoted through A&E, the History Channel, Discovery Channel, and even the Travel Channels, to name a few.
Mark also founded the Ghost of Gettysburg candlelight walking tours and then expanded his live storytelling with his Ghost of Fredericksburg tours.
And here to tell us more about his latest adventures, please put your hands together and welcome Mark Nesbitt.
Welcome, Mark.
Hello guys.
How you doing, sir?
Just fine.
Well, we are excited to have you here. Like I said before we went on air, I said I'm a huge fan of history, and of course all of us are, but paranormal mixed with history is, you can't get any better than that. That's right, catnip. Yes.
You can get better than that, but it requires cookies, ice cream, ghost, and history.
So,
well, you know, it's almost a natural when you, especially when you come to battles. You know, and of course the American Civil War. You know, we've certainly had our share of battles on the North American continent.
Of course, yes.
It's as I say in my speeches. It's you know, when you analyze what creates ghosts, battles are almost the perfect storm to do that. So.
Well, I want to get started because, well, first of all, for people that have only been on the first time, we always want to know how you got started with what you've done as a writer and investigator and especially in the paranormal world. So how did you get started?
Well, I was lucky because I got a job as a National Park Service ranger here at Gettysburg while I was still in college, and then continued to work here for a number of years afterwards. And one of the things that happened, since I was the bachelor in the Park Service at that time, they put me in several of the houses out on the battlefield. You know, all those beautiful Civil War houses that were there at the time of the battle. Mm-hmm. They like to put rangers in those for security reasons. But I got to live in 4 of them out there. And interesting things would happen to me while I was there. Doors that I'd shut would be open the next morning. This would happen time after time. I heard a baby crying in one of the buildings. Actually, it was a National Cemetery Lodge. I lived in the cemetery for a while, which was interesting. And I heard a baby crying, and I was actually taking my dishes out to the kitchen. I'm like, what was that? Was that pipes? And I'm thinking, no, that sounded like a baby crying. Well, what would happen is I'd go then into the coffee room the next morning, and I'd say, you know, the weirdest thing that happened at the cemetery lodge, I heard a baby crying, and my colleagues would be like, wait, you need to talk to such and such who lived there before you. So I talked to them, and sure enough, they would have had the same experience. And this would go back a couple of, several generations. In other words, several people who lived in the house would have heard this these strange things that happened. It kind of got me interested. So I started talking to people, jotting down notes, and eventually these notes grew and grew and grew. And I left the National Park Service because I always wanted to be a writer. I didn't want to be a park ranger for the rest of my life. And I went to a publisher and I said, would you be interested in the ghost stories of Gettysburg? And they said, sure. So I wrote the book, the very first book, figuring that would be it. And mostly my experiences and other experiences that I collected from older park rangers and actually even visitors that came in. Well, the book came out, and within 2 weeks I started getting letters, phone calls, faxes. This is before tweets or anything like that. And people would say basically that, I'm glad you wrote your book. I realize I'm not insane. I'm not crazy. Here's what happened to me at Gettysburg. And between that and then later on, the books kind of changed because I started investigating about book 3 or 4. And so the nature of the books changed a little bit. But that and my own investigations turned into 7 books, and I'm working on an 8th volume, just of the ghosts of Gettysburg.
That's crazy.
And so it's been quite a ride over the last 20 or so years. And of course, then we started the ghost tours in Gettysburg, and then other people followed. I do a successful business, then other people like to copy it, which we've had. So now Gettysburg has a very, very lively ghost industry. Almost any night in the summer, spring, and fall, you can see groups of people walking through the streets listening to ghost stories. So that's basically how it started. I actually had some experiences of my own, and then started collecting them.
Well, when you're conducting the ghost tours, the walking tours, and that sort of thing, Mark, have you ever been working with the tour where someone in the group had an experience with a ghost?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we've had many, many experiences. Now, I actually don't give the tours. We get too many people for me to do that myself.
Yeah.
We have 20 guides that come on periodically. We usually send out 5 or 6 a night. And they have come back with some weird stories. And 2 or 3 of my books, I actually have an entire chapter called Tales from the Guides. And they have had some experiences out there. In fact, maybe the one that stands out the most was one night when they were going past this building that was closed for the night because it was an insurance company, but it was here at the time of the battle and occupied by troops. As they're walking by, a couple of the kids said that, there are people in that building, and the guide was like, no, it's closed for the night. There's no one. No, we can see them walking around. And sure enough, they could see people in the building. They brave guides and tourists sent the 3 little kids over there to look in the window.
That's crazy.
Look in the window, and they came back, and the kids said, there's Civil War soldiers in that house. And they touched the children, and the children were ice cold.
Oh.
So the group went over, a few of the braver ones went over, and they came back, and they said, there's one Civil War soldier standing, leaning against the mantle. There's another one over in the corner, and there's another one sitting down at an invisible table. He looks like he's eating something. This went on for 45 minutes.
What?
45
that
minutes.
is unheard
People
of.
were taking pictures. They had another one of our groups come by, and they told them about them. They went over, they looked at it, and they had the same experience. So, and this building is now, it's still on our tour. It's interesting because now it's an ice cream parlor, so I guess it's maybe a little happier than an insurance company. and I don't think they've had quite as dramatic an experience as those 2 tours had that one night. But we have other experiences on our tours as well.
That is fascinating.
Guess
I'm
where
going to
we're
go.
going. I was going to say, guess where the next vacation is.
Well, let's start with Gettysburg. Everybody's heard of the Battle of Gettysburg, but July 1st through the 3rd, 1863, when the battle took place. Could you give us a little more history background before we talk about the intensity of the losses and then, of course, the many spirits that probably still linger around this area?
Sure. Well, Gettysburg took place about in the middle of the 4-year American Civil War, and it was the end, the culmination of the second Southern invasion of the North. They only invaded twice. Once it was turned back at Antietam or Sharpsburg, which is in September of 1862, the bloodiest single day in all of American history.
So awful.
And then Gettysburg turned out to be a 3-day battle and was the bloodiest battle in the entire Civil War. 51,000 casualties in 3 days. That's a baseball or a football stadium, professional stadium full of people.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and the town was only about 2,400 people at the time. So you can imagine all these wounded dropped down on the town of Gettysburg. But it took 3 days. The first day was basically the contact of the two. The Confederates actually won the first day. The Southerners won the first day, driving the Union troops back from the north and the west of town through the town of Gettysburg, and then the Southerners actually captured the town of Gettysburg. My building, where we, maybe 20 yards from where I'm sitting right now, was captured by the Confederates. We know that Georgia troops were probably in that building, and they stayed there for 2 days. The healthy ones were upstairs on the second floor, taking pot shots at the Union soldiers a couple of 100 yards south of where we are now, and the ones that were tired or wounded were down below on the ground floor, trying to just recuperate. And they held my building for 2 days, and there was actually we know that there was a Union soldier in there at one time as well. He had been wounded, and he was there prior to the Confederates capturing the town. And we have the story from the ladies who were living at the time, where he was wounded. They hit him in the attic, and the one younger, the daughter, actually created a ruse, acted like she fainted or something. And of course, the noble Confederate soldiers ran over to see if they could help, and they hustled the soldier down the stairs, across what is now the kitchen, and outside into the house next door. Kind of an adventure, that these two ladies were involved in. It was kind of interesting. So we know that our building was occupied by Confederates, and over the years we've done some investigations in our own building. Obviously, it's great to have your own building in a battle town like Gettysburg. I can lock it down. It's like a laboratory.
Wow.
Where I can do paranormal studies in there.
Story.
And we've gotten EVP, lots and lots of hundreds, if not thousands, of EVPs from that building, and other places as well. I got EVP is everyone seems to have a specialty in the field, and mine seems to be EVP. But maybe it's because I speak the soldiers' language, because I've studied them for so long. At any rate, it's very so Gettysburg. At any rate, to finish that story, July 2nd was probably the bloodiest day, fighting almost all day long, and then July 3rd is famous for Pickett's Charge, the great Confederate assault on the center of the Union line. Robert E. Lee was the Confederate commander here, the famous general. George Meade was the Union commander, and Lee had tried on July 2nd both ends of the Union line, the flanks, and they were solid. They were on hills called Culp's Hill and Little Round Top. Terrific battle for both of those. And then, of course, on July 3rd was Pickett's Charge. About 12,500 Confederates advanced across an open field into the center of the Union line. And when the fighting there was over, 2/3 were casualties. In other words, about 8,000 went down in about 50 minutes.
50
of
minutes.
Fighting, yeah.
It just amazes me when you hear these numbers that were lost in minutes and hours. It's crazy.
And it's hand-to-hand combat, not
not from
long
miles
range.
away.
Right.
Yeah. You were talking about you've studied this for so long. You got to know the battles, the stories, and even some of the soldiers. Is there any soldiers that have appeared to you or came to you through their own spirit on the battlefield that you've seen that you knew exactly who that was?
I have personally. I have had probably four. I equivocate on one. Probably 4 visuals. Okay, where I actually saw something. The rest have been other experiences. I've been touched, smelled things, heard things, and that type of thing. There is, of all the stories that I've collected, and it's over 1,000,
Wow.
just of Gettysburg alone. There's only one ghost that I've sort of been able to identify, and that is the spirit of a general here. John Reynolds was his name. He was here about 15 minutes. He was Major General commanding the First Corps, and was leading his troops into battle on the morning of July 1st, the first day of the battle. Turned in his saddle to see his soldiers coming, and was struck in the back of the neck by a bullet. So he was only here about 15 minutes and was killed almost instantly. He was from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, so he was fighting on his own home turf, and he knew the consequences if they lost here. At any rate, I had been contacted. We have a Lutheran seminary here in Gettysburg, and it's up on Seminary Ridge, which is part of the first day's battle. And that's where his troops actually passed through the area of the seminary, and when he was shot, his body was carried back through the area of the seminary, right across the land where some modern dormitories were built, and back into town. He let's fast forward to about 1980. I got a call from a seminarian who had read my first book, and he said, "I think I had an experience here in the seminary. Can I tell you about it?" So we sat down and we talked. His story was that in the middle of the night, he was awakened by one of his seminarians in the dorm down the hall, screaming. And he thought, he's a former Army. It's 1 in the morning. I don't know what he's doing his Army shouts for or his calls, but he stopped. So I'm going to go back to sleep. About an hour later, he woke up because he felt cold. He thought maybe he'd left a window open, and he opened his eyes, and there, floating in his room, was a dark face, a beard, dark eyes, and only from the waist up he saw him. He thought he's going to be attacked, so he shouted, and he realized then that the thing didn't respond to him. He closed his eyes, he prayed, as any good seminarian would, and he opened his eyes, and there he was again. This happened 2 more times, and finally, the thing disappeared. A couple days later, he's walking down the street and sees his friend who he'd heard scream. And he was teasing him. He said, "Well, are you practicing your Army war calls or something?" And the guy got deadly serious, and he said, "No." He said, "I had an experience in my room the other night. I woke up, and there was a head floating in my room." And he described this head as having dark eyes, dark face, and a beard. He described the same thing. Apparently, the specter moved down the hall a little bit when he realized he wasn't welcome because the guy screamed at him, and went into this other fellow's room. I took to this fellow who had talked to me a series of photographs to him of several general officers, and asked him, "Were any of these? Does any of these guys look familiar?" And he looked and he said, "This guy right here," and it was Reynolds. Mm-hmm. And that was the route that Reynolds' body would have been carried right through this modern dorm where the guy was staying. He's also been seen in the building where his body was taken. I have at least 2 accounts of people looking through the window at night after it's been closed and seeing what they thought was a wax figure lying on a cot. And they described it, and it was a description of Reynolds. So but you would think with, basically 51,000 casualties, 200,000 men who fought here, and they're all dead now, you would think that more would be able to be identified.
Right.
That's the only one. But there were so many, I don't mean to belittle them, but there were so many anonymous soldiers, just regular guys that were here that, you can't really identify, but the officers you can, because they're usually photographs of them. So that's That's the only one that I can really identify as the ghost of.
That's pretty amazing.
Here.
I know.
No,
Rob-
I'm just still.
And yeah, I know we're all like gobsmacked here. So, Mark, let me ask you something. So, when Reynolds first exposed his head, when he first made his presence known to the first gentleman in the seminary, and he screamed, and then, of course, there's going to be a level of fear. There's going to be a lot of like, WTF, what just happened here?
Right.
And then an hour later, he shows up in the second person's room. Now, I don't know nothing about no ghost, but what I have learned through years and years and years of doing intuitive readings for people, and then little things I've learned along the way, some people would say that when you have an experience with a ghost or a poltergeist and or whatever, that it's important not to get into that real fear-based, scared place because they can feed off of that. So my question is, between the first time Reynolds scared this person and he was just from the head up, did he gain a certain level of energy or power possibly from that to then see the second guy an hour later from the waist up?
That is an excellent question, and I would have to say yes, because, and that is, a theory that I have read too, is that they do gain, they need some sort of energy.
Yeah.
Because they don't have breakfast, lunch, and dinner like we do.
Right.
You know what I mean? And the way they get energy is either from us, or sometimes, for example, mechanical things. I have literally hundreds of stories of people going out on the Gettysburg battlefield, starting to take pictures. All of a sudden, their batteries die in their camera.
Yeah.
I mean, hundreds of people have had that's happened to. It's happened to me, as a matter of fact. And so, I would, if you want to present that as a theory, I would subscribe to it, because I think that's probably what happened. Is that he may have fed off the one individual's fear, and then an hour later he got down, and the other person said he spent a little more time with him, so he may have been feeding off of his fear as well.
Well, it also seems to me that Reynolds is he was on home turf. He was doing what he was doing to do his part in the battle, and then was immediately killed and shot in the back of the neck. I would think he's still around, because I wonder on a human level if he felt like he had let his people down.
Yeah.
And he's still overseeing the men, as it were.
Yeah, that's another good theory, because obviously he was no one's more devoted to duty than soldiers, and he was a professional soldier. He'd been one since he graduated from West Point, and he'd been to the in fact, he was stationed, I believe, in a little adobe village called Los Angeles, I think, for a while. And then he came back to fight the American Civil War. So that that would make sense, that he may have felt that there was some unfinished business, which, as I'm sure you know, is one of the things that would create a ghost. That he didn't finish his duty of being a soldier and commanding his troops here at Gettysburg. So him returning to Gettysburg would not be a surprise.
Wow. And so that is an unbelievably detailed, amazing story where we can track it back to who this person was. My question for you is, did you have an experience that's connected to the Gettysburg or anything else in all of your years of being a paranormal investigator? Have you ever had an experience where you thought you were going to just mess your pants and run out of the room screaming, that you've never told anybody about, where you literally were scared to death for even just a second?
I hate to disappoint you, but no, not really. It's what happens, and it's kind of strange. I don't know whether it's become being a writer for so long, where you click into this objective type of attitude, but all of a sudden it's like, okay, what's that? What is that I'm seeing? And you try and explain it. Your brain kind of, when the visuals, especially, or some of the experiences that I've had. Like, for example, a place called the Cashtown Inn is very haunted. It was about 3/4 of the Confederate Army came through Cashtown on their way to Gettysburg, and the Cashtown Inn was there. It became headquarters for a couple of generals. We were doing an investigation down in the cellar. Great place, of course.
Oh.
Cellars and attics are always wonderful places to investigate. And I had a group down there because it was kind of a teaching investigation. The lights were off, of course. You know, you got to have the lights off. And I was trying to get EVP, so it was very quiet. All of a sudden, I felt a finger, a bony finger, go down my shoulder blade, about 7 or 8 inches. And I turned around immediately. I thought someone was goofing on me, you know. And I looked at the group. I said, "Are you guys all here? Did anybody go behind me?" And they're like, "No, we're all here." Okay, all right. And I said, "That's a nerve. A nerve just twitched." Happened again. And I looked again, and I said, "You sure no one's behind me?" "No, we're all here." Okay. It happened a third time. And finally, I just gave up. I said, "Okay, guys, all right, you got me. You got me." But, you know, I'm trying to explain it in my head, and so the fear is not...
So it doesn't take
It
you
hasn't
over.
happened yet. Let me put it that way. I'm not done with my investigation. One of these days, I might have to change my underwear again.
So, right. Did you possibly have an EVP on or your group while that was happening? So as you're asking, you know, did one of you do that? And then you hear some voice go, "It was me."
I did have I think I may have turned it off for that. I was doing the session and I stopped it because I didn't want to interrupt the session with, you know.
Oh.
Yeah, I should have left it on, I know, but I did. I think I did turn it off for that. But I've gotten so much EVP down in the basement of the Cashtown Inn that it's really, really remarkable, and other places as well. But in fact, one of the books that I wrote called Civil War Ghost Trails, I got a chance to go to all the major Civil War battlefields in the country.
Oh.
And I wrote about the history, which is the way I like to do it. I wrote about the history. Then I wrote about the ghost stories that were there. And then Carol and I, my wife and I, tried to do some mini investigations there. And I was getting EVP at some of these other battlefields, too. I was kind of sigh of relief because I'm thinking, gee, maybe I can just do this at Gettysburg and that's it. But I did get EVP at some of the other major battlefields. We actually, in the book, it tells you where, we couldn't figure out where to put the sound, the EVP, in the book because you have to have a CD or whatever. So my wife came up with the idea, why don't we create a web page?
Ooh, she's smart.
Yes, she will. She's a former programmer.
That's why.
Yeah, it helps, marry up. But so he's created a web page, and so in the book it has references, you know, where, for example, I got at a place called Kennesaw Mountain, at a place called the Dead Angle, and the soldiers themselves named it that. They were pinned. Union soldiers were pinned down about 30 yards from the Confederate line for a day. They just couldn't move because the firing was so hot there. And I asked, I think it was an Indiana or Illinois soldier, just an anonymous soldier. I said, what was the fighting like here? And when I played it back, of course, you can't hear anything when you're getting EVP. When I played it back, you heard the word murder.
Oh, God, that's horrible.
Yeah. So, but that was one of the places that I got some results. But, Fredericksburg as well, that's another big battlefield. But Gettysburg, living here for 25 or 30 years, gives me a familiarity with the site, with the battlefield, and not just the park battlefield. A lot of people come to Gettysburg and they think the park owns all the battlefield, which is not true. A lot of it is owned by the seminary. A lot of it is owned by the college, Gettysburg College, and the town itself was battlefield. There was fighting going on in the streets as well, and bullets flying right where I'm sitting right now. So
That's crazy.
Well,
Mark, what we're going to do is we're going to take just a 15-second break for our advertiser, but we have so much more questions to ask you. So I'm Tony Sweet.
I'm Eddie Connor.
I'm Jamie Gibson.
And this is Truth Be Told. We'll be back in about 15 seconds. Don't go anywhere. We hope you're enjoying today's show, which is sponsored by Earth Friendly Products. For over 40 years, Earth Friendly Products have brought you the greenest home merchandise for all your family needs. Learn more at ecos.com. That's ecos.com. Now back to the show.
Welcome back, everybody, to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm Eddie Connor.
I'm Tony Sweet.
And I'm Jamie Gibson.
And we're here with paranormal investigator Mark Nesbitt. Mark's the author of 15, count them, people.
1, 2, 3, 4.
15 books. There you go. And we're sure you've seen his stories on the national television because he's been promoted through A&E, the History Channel, Discovery Channel, and Travel Channels, to name a few. He's also founded the Ghost of Gettysburg candlelight walking tours. Ooh. And I'm telling you, where you depends when you go on this tour after some of the things he's told us, and also the Ghost of Fredericksburg tours. So I want to, you gave me an idea when you were talking about your wife. What's your wife's name?
Carol.
We love Carol.
Hi, Carol.
Hi, Carol.
And it's this. When people, back in the old days, whenever I was working in retail and department stores and stuff, we had this thing called GWP. I'm from the South, so it's going to sound like I'm going, GWP. And then,
he is.
Yeah, and then it's also a PWP. Well, a GWP is a gift with purchase, and a PWP is a purchase with purchase. Mark, now, when people buy your book, you know what you should encourage them to do? The GWP is they get a gift with purchase, drive them to the page that Carol asked you to build, and then go into a little bit more like specific stuff, things that nobody will get unless they buy the book, because the page is already there, and you're going to sell more books.
I always mention it, whenever I'm signing and talking to them.
Yeah.
And but you know what? We do not have a sign or anything on the book itself that says. We do have one little segment in the book that says a note about EVP, where it explains what EVP is and where they can go for it. But that might be a good idea. I could put a little, at least in our bookstore, I could put a little sign on it.
Yeah, and here's on the back of your business card, literally just get a stamp. You can go to Office Depot, okay, for $12.99, have you a stamp made, put it on the back of the business card. They buy the book, put it in there, and go, listen, you're going to go hear dead people on this website just because you purchased this book. Now, whenever you were traveling the country, going to some of the other sites, did you by chance head up toward Mississippi and Louisiana, New Orleans, and all of that?
We've done an investigation in New Orleans. We went to Vicksburg, Mississippi for because that was a major battle in the Civil War. In fact, Vicksburg fell the day after the Battle of Gettysburg was lost by the Confederacy. So they lost Gettysburg on July 3rd. Then on July 4th, 1863. Vicksburg, which that freed up then the entire Mississippi River. Wow. So that was a devastating week for the Confederacy.
Wow.
July 1st through the 4th or 5th. People always ask us, here at Gettysburg, where was Grant? We say Vicksburg, Mississippi. He wasn't here. Grant fought the Battle of Gettysburg, but it wasn't Grant.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things about Truth Be Told that we love is when we get to speak to professionals like you, Mark, and you know a lot of the behind-the-scenes things that most other people don't, and you're such a history buff, and you obviously love what you do. Now, we are certain that along the way, you found out some information that probably is not into history books. Am I right?
Yeah, I guess. I have kind of an inside track on some of the, because I lived in some of the houses and things like that. Yeah.
Would you like to share just one little piece of information? Just something small, just to whet everybody's appetites.
Set the history books right.
Yeah, so we can rewrite the history books and make things right.
Yeah, well, for example, this is probably kind of dull, but may not be what you're looking for. But for example, forever the historians have been blaming Jeb Stuart, the Confederate cavalry commander, for the defeat here at Gettysburg. And because he was, they say he was out on a joyride around the Union Army for about 20-some days before he finally met up with Lee. And the interesting part is I eventually wrote a book about it called Saber and Scapegoat, the Jeb Stuart controversy in the Battle of Gettysburg. But I kind of defended him and said, no, basically he was following orders, if you read the orders carefully. And but historians, a lot of historians don't want, they've been on TV, trashing Stewart. In my early days, I used to trash Stewart. But so I finally came to the conclusion that he was way too good a general to just not, just disobey orders. And so my conclusion is that, yeah, he may have stretched the orders a little bit, but he did not disobey them. And basically what he did, it wasn't exactly a joyride. I think in those 20-some days he fought a battle every other day.
Wow.
It was a fighting movement that he was making. So, plus it was nothing was easy during the Civil War.
No.
Foot soldiers were literally foot soldiers. They marched everywhere, and the cavalrymen, 8 hours a day in a saddle, 10 hours a day in a saddle is no joyride.
No.
So,
and underfed.
I guess my defense of Jeb Stuart would be the inside baseball, I guess you could call it.
Okay.
Battle of Gettysburg. But we as a park ranger, we had a lot of interesting things happen to us. I know a lot of the older rangers told me some pretty interesting stories that had to do with the paranormal.
Oh.
And so I put those in my first book.
Okay.
And some in the second. But for example, let me just give you a quick example.
Sure.
I was on patrol one night, and I got a call that the superintendent, who was like the big boss here, had a prowler in his house.
Oh, hell no.
And I only was 30 seconds. I was just down the block from this place, so I pulled in and he lived in the Culp Farm, which is right on the battlefield. To give you a little background, the Culp Farm was named, the Culp family here is very famous because there was a young soldier, Wesley Culp, who had left Gettysburg prior to the Civil War, and he went down to Shepherdstown, Virginia, to follow his calling. He was a carriage maker. While he was down there, he joined a militia group, and then when the war broke out, the militia group ended up signing up en masse to the Confederate Army. As a matter of fact, he ended up in the Stonewall Brigade, Stonewall Jackson's unit. Fought throughout the entire war and ended up fighting at Gettysburg. Okay, he was born and raised in Gettysburg, moved to Virginia, joined a militia outfit, ended up fighting in battle on, of all places, Culp's Hill, named after his family. Not only that, about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning of July 3rd, 1863, he was killed on Culp's Hill.
Oh, wow.
The story is that they buried him out there on the battlefield. His commander knew that his family lived in Gettysburg. He actually went to the family and told them where Wesley was buried. And the sisters, his two sisters, claimed that they had gone out there but couldn't find the body. Now, neither they were telling the truth, because the battlefield is a terrible, awful, hideous place after a battle, or they did find his body, and one theory has it is that they took him up to the Evergreen, a local cemetery, and buried him there in the dead of night, because he was a traitor to some people in Gettysburg. And the other theory is that they took him back to his uncle's house, the Culp house, and buried him in the basement, because all basements there had, Civil War houses had dirt floors.
God almighty.
So here I am, fast forward, 100-some years, and I got to the Culp farm, and the superintendent and his whole family was actually out on the porch. He had 3 girls, and they were scared to death. And there was another park ranger who had been visiting, and he was standing there. His eyes looked like saucers. And the superintendent said, "Go out back." The guy we just heard him running up and down the hallway upstairs. He had to have jumped out the window. Well, I run around the back, and it kind of falls away. The earth falls away. So instead of a 2-story drop, it's actually a 3-story drop.
Oh.
And I had my flashlight. I'm looking up and looking down, and I said, "Superintendent, there's nobody came out of that window. He'd still be down here, and there's nobody out in this field." you just said he just was pounding around upstairs 2 seconds ago, and there's nobody out here. And he grabbed the flashlight. He said, "He's got to be out here somewhere. He's got to be out here." We didn't see anything. Later on, I talked to the park ranger who was there. He says, "Man, was that loud? There's somebody in boots running up and down, running up and down." And then, if you were right out there, you went out there right when it stopped. So now the theory is, obviously, it wasn't a prowler.
No.
Theory is it may have been Wesley Culp, the ghost of Wesley Culp, obviously, who still haunts that building because he's still buried there.
Wow.
That is fascinating. Is the technology for what you do as an investigator, is there new technology coming out so you have better EVPs and better cameras where you can capture stuff like this?
Well, actually, we've been using about everything we can in terms of, we've tried everything that you see, on Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures and things like that. And believe it or not, some of the older stuff is just as good. I've got an EVP. I use a 20-year-old recorder, digital recorder, to get my EVP. Apparently, people were complaining when it first came out because they would be trying to dictate something, and they were hearing other voices being recorded, and they sent it back to the manufacturer, and they said, this is faulty. It's recording. They didn't realize what they were getting. Okay, so I have those recorders, but I've also gotten EVP while I wasn't even trying. I was actually in a historic house in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and I was interviewing the woman who was there. It was just me and the woman and her son, who was over in the other section. I wasn't interviewing him at that time, and I asked her a question. And when I played it back, I heard her answering, and superimposed over that was a male voice that said, "I'll have my say." And there's nowhere it could have come from except, EVP. And so that. But the other interesting thing is, I have a friend who is also a very good researcher and investigator. She said she got EVP one time on a SpongeBob SquarePants recorder. So it doesn't, it's a two-way, kind of a two-way street. We can try to get the spirits to cooperate. We can beg, we can entice, we can do all we want, but it's kind of up to them too. Yeah. And if they want to, they'll, imprint their, or if they have enough energy, they'll imprint their voices or their images when they kind of feel like it. It's not all up to us.
It's just like doing readings.
Yeah.
It's not up to us if they come through sometimes.
That's right.
And talking about that, have you ever partnered up with a medium to get more information from a certain experience you've had?
Yeah, Jamie, we have 3 mediums that I work with, and people are astounded because I said I'm inviting such and such over, and they expect somebody to show up in a flowing caftan and a turban and a crystal ball, and they're soccer moms. They look like somebody walking down the street, but they're really terrific, and we've used them. We've been doing in our investigations, and especially our teaching investigations, we've kind of switched things around a little bit. I believe that we all have some sort of psychic ability, some sort of mediumship, but we have a tendency to deny it.
Yeah.
You'll hear a voice and you'll be like, "Oh, what was that?" And then it's like, "Oh boy, well, it's my imagination, or I had a couple too many beers or whatever." We pick up
Right.
all kinds of excuses, and rather than embrace it. So what we've been doing is trying to do intuition forward investigations where, okay, here we are. I want you tell me where you think we should go in this building. Where do you think the energy is strongest? And then we go from there. And it seems to work more often than not. We seem to get more results when we just let the individuals, after they,
right.
shed this whole idea that they have to make an excuse for it. Once they get rid of that idea and embrace it, then it seems to work almost every time.
That's great.
Well, Mark, I want to ask you a question. We have about 5 minutes left, and a lot of people that are listening to our live broadcast or even the podcast later, they might want to take a trip out to Gettysburg. Is there a certain time of year that people see more spirit than or ghost than other times? Yeah,
Great
like,
question.
Season.
Like if
Well,
it's
like-
on the anniversary.
like on the
of.
anniversary
Yeah.
or
Everyone asks me that if there's more activity during the anniversary. Well, the problem is, it's anniversary is right around the 4th of July.
right.
So that's one of our busiest weekends. So the question is there more activity, or are there just more people to witness it?
Oh, right.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I can't really answer that question, but I do know that there is activity in the wintertime here.
That's what I
We've
was going to
gotten-
ask.
You know, we've gotten results in the wintertime. So almost any time is a good time to visit Gettysburg. The winters are fairly mild. They're not too bad. I always tell people come in June and September because, you know, schools are just getting in or out,
Right.
and everything's open. It's just not as busy, so that's a fun time. I try and steer people who are interested in the paranormal away from Halloween.
Yeah.
That's here.
Yeah.
Crazy in Halloween. But and anybody who wants any information on our tours or my books or anything, ghostsofgettysburg.com. You know, it's pretty simple.
And also, Gettysburg itself, the battlefield, I'm sure there's a lot of spirits, but do you see there's a radius around the area that homes,
Overflow.
Yeah,
of-
overflow.
I was going to
yeah.
ask that question.
There
I
we
swear,
go.
I was going to ask if there was something where they just get sick and tired of the tourists and they just sort of went over to some of the churches and the hospitals and just sort of like, rock their
away.
boat. Yeah.
Good question. Well, you know, I also wrote a book with Patty Wilson called Haunted Pennsylvania, and the big book of Pennsylvania ghost stories. You'd be surprised how much activity there is in the state of Pennsylvania. But well, like I said, as a matter of fact, Emmitsburg, Maryland. There are several good ghost stories I got out of there, which is 10 miles south. But all part, that's part of the march route that the Confederates and Union soldiers marched along. The places where they fought are active, but also the places that became hospitals,
Oh, yeah.
which were in the outskirts of the town.
Non-field
There's
hospitals,
the David Stewart farm, 7 miles out of town, was a hospital, and they are very active. But they also have pre-Civil War spirit.
Oh, that would
Wow.
be interesting.
Yeah,
Well-
early settlers.
Well, like I said, we're almost out of time, but we'd love to ask you back and talk more about haunted crime scenes because I know that's one of the topics that you have, and I would love to hear more about that maybe the next time you come back.
Oh, but
I
really,
would love to. Yeah, maybe we can get Catherine Ramsland, my co-author, on too for that.
Love it.
right, just in 10 seconds, tell us what one of the most famous crime scene is in one of your books.
Oh, let's see. Believe it or not, it's a Hotel Bethlehem up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. We got them to open up the case using paranormal evidence.
Really?
Oh, see.
Cray.
Mark's coming back.
He's definitely coming back.
There's a cliffhanger.
All right, Mark Nesbitt, everybody. Yes. Go to marknesbitt.info. And also, Mark, give us
Ghostofgettysburg.com. That's ghostofgettysburg.com.
.com. Perfect.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. You've been such a delight and a lot of information. We really appreciate you being on the show.
Tell Kara we say
Thanks
hey.
for having me.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys. Well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to have
Robert Schultz.
Schwartz. Here, let's do that
We
again.
were talking about
when
Charlie
we come
Brown
back,
earlier.
when we come back, we have.
Robert Schultz.
There we go.
Schwartz.
All right. We want to thank Mark Nesbitt. All right. Truth be told, I'm Tony Sweet.
Yeah.
And
Jamie Gibson.
we'll be right back.